Hey everybody, Phobos here, coming at you with a little bit of a priest gearing guide before PoE comes out. Gonna make a couple WoW things today, and then gonna be pretty much going into a lot of PoE content from Friday onwards. So, today I want to talk a bit about priest gearing and BIS lists and stuff like that. I want to preface this by saying that I've never played really private servers before. I did play classic WoW way back in the day, played a paladin, so the gearing was a little different. So when I came into this game, I was very much of the mind that, try and learn as much as I can from private server players and everything. And I'm still obviously, super, into that mindset. Luckily, I found, a really great guild. They've been, teaching me a lot of stuff about the game. It's been going really well so far, so that's been awesome. But the one thing that I've encountered that I've disagreed with so far is a lot of the BIS and just kind of gearing philosophy in general. And I do want to say specifically that this is probably geared towards the current tier. I can't say how things are going to change next tier, and I'm going to be totally willing to adapt. But given this tier, I think a lot of the gearing priorities are just kind of a bit off, and I want to take some time to explain why, and maybe this will help out some newer players getting started in Classic that don't really know, how to gear and stuff like that. And so basically this is my healing set, and then this is the actual set that I have equipped, and I'm going to go through them, and then we'll compare the differences and stuff like that. So what I'm currently wearing: Halo of Transcendence, Tooth from EBRS Upper, Prophecy, Saffron Drape. Just got this. Using this in Cloak of the Cosmos is kind of like a wash for me. I didn't get Height of the Wild yet, just because it was so expensive. I actually was going to buy it, but Larval Acid shot up because I believe they're being used in the future. So haven't really got the Height of the Wild yet. Robes of Prophecy. This is going to be a controversial one. I'll go through this is non-controversial, pretty controversial. I would say not very controversial here, although a bunch of people disagree with me. Controversial, non-controversial, pretty much the best in slot. This is a little bit controversial. This is fairly controversial, non-controversial. Pretty non-controversial, I would say. Definitely non-controversial, super controversial, non-controversial, and non-controversial just depends on what you have available. Obviously Benediction's BIS, and this is pretty non-controversial, just depends on what you have available. Now, everything there that I said is listed as quote-unquote controversial. That does not really line up with either the previous list or even the full-on Molten Core / Dire Maul Abyss list. And basically what I've noticed, if you go to this is the healing set, a lot of these items here are what I would say are the non-controversial options for that slot. So to go over the spots, this has plus 33 healing, plus 68 healing, plus 33 healing. In this case, you're gaining 50 some healing more. This is a straight 33 plus healing increase. This is about 15 healing, something like that. This is 20 healing around there. This is straight up 30 healing. And as you can see, we have 646 healing in this particular setup. And then in this setup, we have 481 healing. So a fairly substantial difference. And pretty much all of the WoW Classic guides that I'll see are for basically to max out your healing as much as possible, right? And in some cases, I feel I think there's a reasonable trade-off to be made there, but in other cases, I just think it's kind of absurd. So one of the ones, for example, is a lot of people actually hate on Mantle of Prophecy. My guild in particular thinks this is a good item, which actually surprised me because I know a lot of people that I've talked to that play private servers think this is a bad item. I can't understand why. I agree with my guild. they compare this to, like, I think Burial Straw is what it is, which is the plus 20 int and then 20 to damage and healing. So you're basically losing like 11 healing here, but you're gaining 3 int and you're just gaining like a bunch of other stats, right? Like 13 stamina, 10 spirit, and some shadow res. And like to me, like just losing that 11 healing to gain 13 stamina is pretty much invaluable because, you know, by the time you take into consideration the coefficients on a lot of these healing spells, that 11 healing is probably getting you, what, like 6-7 healing at most, and then, you know, it's just like completely useless when compared to 13 stam, right? Even if 13 stam keeps you alive one time, it keeps all your world buffs up, and, you know, obviously there's something in I guess like when you're doing anything at a competitive or high level in general, right? There's always a bit of discussion about, should you be playing for the optimal, right? Because, like, obviously you want your performance to be optimal. You're expecting the performance of people you're playing with to be optimal, right? And I can sympathize with that to a large degree, right? You don't want to be, if you're playing a game like League of Legends, you know, you don't want to be playing the game incorrectly to try and compensate for things that are going on your team that, like, shouldn't be happening, right? Because then you form bad habits and things like that. And I can understand how something like that would be similarly applied to the gearing situation, where you're thinking, like, okay, like, I don't want to sacrifice any ounce of, like, individual performance that I can put out to help try and compensate for what could possibly be a mistake that comes up. But I think just realistically, what you're giving up here is so infinitesimally small, and so basically, like, it's not really going to have an impact on you either way on this particular piece of gear, because the difference is so small, right? But not having that 13 stam, in the event that something does go wrong, even if it's like 1 out of 5 of your MC clears, you know what I mean? If it saves your world buffs, you're going to perform way better keeping those buffs on than with this plus, you know, 6 extra healing all night. And that should be, to me, should just be intuitively obvious, I feel like. But I feel like some people, when they get into that mindset of really trying to, like, min-max, they just, I don't know, they don't really take things like that into account, and they're just looking at the raw number aspect of it, right? So that's something I wanted to mention on, like, this item in particular. Now, a lot of the other choices are a lot more spicy, right? And as you can see, like, this particular set I have is int geared. So have to explain why I tried to go into int gearing. So initially, like I said, I just went the full healing BIS, and, you know, I was pretty happy with things. My guild is pretty strong guild, and to be honest, like, most of these fights are over very quickly, so you don't really have to worry too much about tons of mana issues. So at the time, I was just like, you know, I'm fine just going like raw plus healing, right? And then I'm thinking, like, on a couple fights though, you know, I'm kind of wishing I had, like, a bigger mana pool. So, like, a little bit early on, I was trying, I popped a flask of distilled wisdom, you know, and I was just like, this lets me spam a lot more kind of like higher cost heals, like flash heals in some cases, that can, like, save people that are in bad spots, you know what I mean? Like somebody taking extra damage or something like that, or if your shield's down, and or even just using more shields in general because, you know, you have the mana to do that. If somebody takes aggro or something like that. So I was like, you know, I really like having this extra mana. I was like, I wonder, like, how much mana we actually get from stuff like int. So I went and I looked it up, and I was like, oh, you know, that's actually, like, really non-trivial, it seems like. And I didn't realize how much int I was losing by making some of these gearing choices. So, for example, when you put on Robes of the Exalted, you get a ton of plus healing, which is great, but you lose literally 25 int, right? Or 27 int. Oops. Path of Exile patchiness. 22 int. So yeah, you lose, like, a massive amount of int. And it's quite a bit of mana difference. As you can see in this set, which is my full-on plus healing set, I have 646 mana, but I only have 6,800 mana basically unbuffed. And in this set, I basically have, like, I need to put, Saffron Drip. Okay, this is the one, sorry. This has like 8k, almost 8.1k mana unbuffed, right? So almost like a, 1250, 1200 mana difference there. And I tried to look at it like this, right? I was like, think about on a boss fight in particular, how many casts you're going to get off, and how many times you need to get off those casts with specific spells to actually make that plus healing be worth it, right? And there's some coefficients you want to keep in mind. So that Renew is 1-to-1, which is really good. But the problem with Renew is that it basically just like, I'd almost call it useless in MC. So when I started out, I had asked our healing like overall class lead about Renew, because I had heard that basically the idea is every guild has one like Renew bot. You know what I mean? And he was like, oh, yeah, that's pretty much true. Do you want to be that person? I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be that person. I don't mind focusing on raid heals or whatever you guys need me to do. So the first raid, I tried to use Renew rather heavily and realized that just likely because of how trivial the content is at this point, your Renew is just getting sniped. Right, it's getting sniped to hell on trash. It's getting sniped on bosses to basically anybody who isn't a tank. And on the tank, I feel like it has very marginal effects at best. Depending on the fight, I will try and keep it on the tank, because I feel like keeping it on the tank, I can sustain it at this point, and there's not really like an issue with it, because even if it goes to overhealing, it kind of doesn't matter, because it's not like I'm spamming it on everybody and losing a ton of mana. I'm really only losing mana on that one particular spell. And there's the off chance that, maybe it could tick at the right time and, save him, or get a couple ticks in there, and basically he takes a hit. He would have been killed, not killed anymore. So I have been keeping it on the tanks, or pretty much the primary tank, but I just don't find it to be a super useful spell. So I would say basing your plus healing, like how much plus healing you want to bring to the raid off of Renew, is maybe not the best thing to do, right? Then let's go to your like bread and butter heals, right? So greater heal and heal. Now those have the same coefficient, I believe, of like 0.7 something, maybe like 0.71, which is not terrible, but it's also not great. You're not getting the full amount of healing, obviously. So. And to be completely honest, in a lot of fights, having those do any sort of effective work whatsoever, it's just hard, right? Because they're 2.5 second heals, and shamans and other priests can just essentially prop you up with flash heals, right? And flash heal, I think, gets a kind of a bad rap, because I think it's kind of looked at as like, okay, like this is the noob's way to heal, right? Like they're just basic, because it takes like the least, it's the most reactive in a sense, because it takes the least like almost thought to use, because it's like, oh, you just see somebody dinked, and then you immediately cast like a flash heal, right? And that is true to a degree, and it's not like the most mana efficient heal we have or anything, but in cases where your mana sustain isn't going to be an issue, I really see no reason to be trying to force using heal over using flash heal, right? And realistically, if you have a bunch of healers that are, competent and they're geared enough for the content, and your DPS is killing the bosses quickly, I would much rather have healers that are trying to like prop people back up as quickly as possible, to prevent that one-off death that could happen and drop somebody's world buffs on a fight. You know what I mean? So to me, there's really no reason to let people sit in any type of danger, casting longer heals or anything like that, to try and be hyper mana efficient on fights where, especially given your access to things like mana pots and dark runes, the odds of you actually like completely ooming on most of those fights is low, right? So that means if we're talking about flash heal a lot, flash heal has a coefficient of like 0.4, and that's absolutely horrid, right? You're getting almost like just a third of the healing there, a little bit more on each point of healing. So instead of, you're looking at this and you're like initially like, oh my gosh, like 646 healing and 481 healing noob, you know what I mean? It's like 160 healing difference, right? But in reality, it's like if you're using a lot of flash heals, and even mixing that in with some heals and greater heals, you're not seeing, that's not anywhere close to as big of a disparity, right? And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been noticing. And where I really do like the int is on some particular fights like Ragnaros and Domo, right? Because on those fights, having that little bit of extra mana pool, it can actually like allow you to heal so much more. So think of a fight like Domo or Rag that lasts like 2 minutes, basically, right? And think of how many casts you're going to get off in that time, right? And if you have plus 70 extra healing, let's say, right? Because we said 160, right? Total. But if you're using flash heal, it's going to be like less than half of that. If you're using heal, it's going to be a bit more than half. But you're not getting that full value on every heal, right? So let's actually be generous. Let's say that out of 160, you're getting like 100 extra healing on every cast, right? But if I can cast another, let's even go with like something like max rank flash heal, right? Let's say if I cast another max rank flash heal, 380 mana, I'm probably hitting that for like, I don't know, like 1400 or something like that, right? So that's like 14, maybe, let's go 1300. So that's like 13 of the other heals, right? So that's like, I'd have to cast the other, like, 13 times, with the plus 100, basically extra healing from the coefficient on something like heal, right? In order to get back the amount of healing that I got in that one flash heal if I don't overheal, right? And the amount of extra mana I have, I'm not only limited to cast one flash heal. I can cast, let's say, probably, so what is it, like 1200 mana difference? I can cast like 3 full rank, high rank flash heals, right? And then probably like one other spell, for sure, like a lower rank spell. Or in a fight like Domo, if it gets towards the end of the fight, I've still got mana left and other people don't, and I can toss out a bunch of like rank 5 renews, right? That costs like very little mana, and now I've got the whole raid rolling on renews, and it just lets you get a lot more healing in, right? So yeah, I just basically think that the value of intelligence is severely like limited, and I think that going forward into the future, this isn't as big of a conversation topic, right? Looking at a lot of the Blackwing layer gear, basically you're going to end up using pieces that have a lot of int and a lot of healing, and there's not going to be as much choice, I feel like, in how you gear, in the sense that a lot of the items are going to be very much more straightforward, right? You're not really choosing between plus healing for int. It's like all the items at that stage have both, right? So basically, when I take this gear set into Blackwing Lair, what's going to happen is I'm going to just upgrade my plus healing to basically levels that are like in this set now, right? And my mana is going to stay relatively the same and go up a little bit. Whereas if I had this set on, my healing wouldn't really go up a ton, but my my mana would start rising a lot, right? So I feel like in Blackwing Lair, a lot of this kind of is going to equal out anyway. A lot of the choices are pretty obvious, and so that's why I want to make this video now, because I think now, if you're the type that's like really going and you're struggling on going and stuff like that, adding a little more int might help you out. Keep in mind that on trash, obviously plus healing is going to be more effective unless you're kind of able to like basically keep your mana, like if you're able to drink back to full completely, which can happen in some cases, but depending on like what you're running with, and you're gonna have to be doing stuff like dispels and stuff like that, so it can be a bit tricky. But if you can like basically get your mana to full and then dump it, and then get it back, and then you're pulling again, that having the mana there is gonna help. But otherwise, really the plus healing you're gonna see more of an impact from on trash. But if you're struggling like to get through some boss fights without going you want to do your best to keep absolutely everybody alive. Try adding a little more into your gear and see how you like it, because I've been liking it a lot. I still keep all the old stuff just for situations where I may want to go back to just having a raw healing set, especially something like Veil of Straz. In the next tier, obviously you're getting like I think infinite mana there. And that's pretty much it. One last thing is you do get a bit more crit from the inset right now. Personally, I'm not a super big fan of crit from a healing perspective, unless there's some type of mechanic that like really incentivizes you to invest in crit, like a paladin has. Priests and shamans have the armor buffing thing, but realistically, like you can kind of proc that pretty easily with rank 1 flash heal before the pull. And there's going to be enough heals going on the tank where the uptime of that is probably going to be relatively high anyways. So I'm usually not like hyper concerned about not being able to have that up a reasonable amount of the time. So the int in this case, or the spell crit, is really more just about increasing your healing output. And obviously, one of the big drawbacks to trying to factor in int with healing is that when you're casting a heal on somebody, ideally you're not really casting it with the thought that it's going to need to crit to do what you want, right? So if I think particularly in the case of tank healing, like you're not going to use a heal that's so low rank that it needs to crit to be effective or something like that. And the problem is that because you're using heals that you're trying to match appropriately to how much damage the tank is going to take, and how much you're going to eat into certain deficits of health that he's taking, what ends up happening is that if you crit, some of that's going to go to overhealing. So it kind of ends up being like wasted healing anyway. But I do think that crit is not as bad as some people think, for sure. It's definitely not completely useless, especially because there's going to be a lot of cases where, like, so for example, I do a lot of spot healing with like rank 4 flash heal. And it works really well there, I think, because I'll cast it on somebody and it pops them up enough, even at the base heal level, to definitely get them out of danger, right? And the idea is that, like, they're completely fine being hit by that heal. They don't really need somebody else to immediately heal them after that. But if my heal actually does crit, it might actually top them completely. Right, so there's a lot of circumstances like that. And then even in cases where you're like tank healing, a lot of times you're not really going to have a situation where you're putting back the exact amount of health that was taken on a swing or something like that. Or, so if you do get a crit, it won't necessarily be all overhealing. Now, part of the problem with tank healing, though, in general, is that multiple people are hitting the tank at the same time, generally, right? I'm talking about with heals. So the issue you have there is that you're kind of more likely to overheal in general. So if you're critting, that's just kind of like increasing the likelihood even more. But so crit, not terrible, just definitely not something we'd ever really be looking for. But there is like a 3.5% crit difference, which I don't think is like completely useless, but just something to mention. Not the most useful thing, not the least useful thing. So that's pretty much this. Probably way too long. I should probably redo it. But that's my thoughts on gearing. Basically, if you're struggling to have mana, try getting some more int. Sounds obvious, but with the way a lot of the BIS stuff is worked out, it's just it sounds like it would be an obvious adjustment you'd make, but in reality, it's kind of like you're seeing the BIS list. I can understand where people are like, oh, okay, people work this shit out a million times before, so why would I deviate from that? But I think in particular cases, especially this tier, and just with how fast the bosses die and stuff like that, that there's arguments to be made for using more int to be able to spam quicker heals. So That's it for this video. If you liked it, drop a like. If not, dislike. Feel free to talk to me about it in the comments, and see you guys later.